Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me thank Nikkei for inviting me to this forum. When I last addressed this forum last year, I spoke about uncertainties in the world order. Today, these uncertainties have indeed deepened significantly amidst a more volatile, more arbitrary, more protectionist global environment. Undoubtedly, the greatest uncertainty confronting us today is what will happen at the end of the 90-day pause on the U.S. reciprocal tariffs. This is not only holding businesses back from making important decisions on long-term plans, but also discouraging them from near-term hiring and investing. The pullback in economic activity will weaken global growth, and we cannot rule out the possibility of a recession. And this is why Singapore has set up a tripartite task force comprising Singapore government, the employers, and unions, so that we can strengthen our collective sense-making of these changes in the macro environment, mitigate the immediate impact on businesses and workers, and support them to develop new capabilities, new markets, and new supply chain in the longer term. Beyond the economic fallout, Asia will also have to confront three fundamental challenges. First, how can Asia maintain strategic autonomy amidst intensifying US-China contestation? The US-China relationship is one of the most consequential in the world. While we welcome the de-escalation of brinksmanship between US and China for 90 days, both sides will still have a long way to go to resolve their long list of outstanding issues, including market access for US firms, heavy state subsidies for Chinese firms, and non-tariff barriers that US exports face. Without an enduring resolution on these issues, there is always the risk that the tension between US and China will escalate again and spread beyond trade to other areas such as investment, supply chains, and critical technology. While both powers claim that they do not wish to force countries to take sides, each seeks to draw others closer to their respective orbits. This affects many countries in Asia who have deep trade and investment relationship with both powers. It is important, therefore, that we continue to maintain our strategic autonomy and act in a principled and consistent way on the basis of our own national interest. Second, how can we preserve the rules-based multilateral trading system that underpins Asia's economic growth and development? For small and medium-sized economies in Asia that are trade-dependent, the centricity of a rules-based multilateral trading order based on predictable tariff terms with clear and shared frameworks for non-tariff measures is critically important. In particular, the most favored nation, or MFN principle, underpinning the WTO, safeguards a level playing field for economies big and small. If members decide to trade only on their own terms and impose tariffs as and when they wish, larger economies will always possess stronger levers. And on the other hand, smaller economies that have less bargaining power risk being marginalized and left behind. This is why recent moves by some countries to impose and remove tariffs at will are concerning. WTO Director General Ngozi had also urged members negotiating with the US bilaterally to aim to be as WTO consistent as possible, especially with regard to the MFN rules. Amidst a potentially weakening of the multilateral trading system, we must do all we can to reinforce a shared rules-based order so that global trade can continue to be conducted on free, fair, and non-discriminatory basis. The third question is how do we address global threats and protect the global common? Climate change, for example, is one such clear existential threat. Asia is at the epicenter of the battle against climate change. If global temperatures continue to rise at the current rate, the Asian Development Bank estimates that Asia could see losses of up to 40% of its GDP by the year 2100. By 2030, 3/4 of Southeast Asian cities could face regular flooding, potentially displacing tens of millions of people. Extreme weather will disrupt food supplies and unleash public health crisis. There's urgency to galvanize global action, not only for climate mitigation measures, but also to accelerate the green transition. It is therefore disconcerting that the collective commitment to treaties such as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement are waning. Similarly, if the commitment to international institutions such as the WTO, WHO, IMF, and the World Bank weakens, it will also impair our ability to address other global issues such as global pandemic as well as financial crisis. These challenges I've outlined underscore the importance for Asia to find common cause, strengthen our mutual collaboration, so that we can mount a united collective response. Let me share 3 ways we can do this. First, form agile partnerships with like-minded partners. Second, double down on regional integration. And third, press ahead with reforms of global institutions and in particular the WTO. First, we must come together to form agile partnerships that will allow like-minded nations to cooperate and move ahead. I had spoken on the importance of such partnerships last year and highlighted the significance of the WTO Joint Statement Initiative, or JSI, on e-commerce. Japan, Singapore, and Australia are co-conveners of the JSI on e-commerce. This JSI currently involves 91 countries and 91 members that collectively account for over 90% of the global trade. We had sought to formally incorporate the JSI within the WTO framework earlier this February. However, we were not successful in doing so. Nevertheless, we are exploring options to implement the agreement in the interim while we continue to push ahead for its incorporation into the WTO framework. This is one example of flexible multilateralism, where we allow like-minded partners to move ahead on important issues of mutual interest, such as e-commerce, while leaving the door open for others to join in as and when they are ready. We can also forge new alliances by building on existing economic groupings and plurilateral agreements. ASEAN, for example, is exploring how to deepen our economic relations with the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, including the possibility of a FTA between ASEAN and the GCC. We should also study how to deepen trade and investment between GCC and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. The CPTPP is also exploring initiatives to broaden our economic partnerships with ASEAN and the EU. Such initiatives could take the form of dialogues in the first instance and expand to potential areas of cooperation such as trade facilitation or supply chain resilience. These new alliances will facilitate effective and timely collaboration on key trade policies and signal our commitment to a rules-based trading system. Second, we must double down on regional integration by further enhancing our trade as well as digital and physical connectivity. Against an increasingly fragmented and contested global trade environment, it is comforting that many of us in Asia are party to various bilateral, regional, and plurilateral agreements and partnerships. However, we must not rest on our laurels. Instead, we should recognize the challenges of the current turmoil and raise the ambition of each of these mutually reinforcing partnerships. Within ASEAN, we have just concluded the negotiations on the upgrade of the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, or ATIGA, earlier this week. Besides further liberalization of tariff lines among ASEAN members, the ATIGA upgrade will also enhance commitments on non-tariff measures, as well as improve facilitation and transparency on areas such as customs practices. ASEAN is also working with our external partners to upgrade our FTAs with them and ensure that these FTAs remain relevant and effective. The ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand FTA upgrade has recently come into force, and we have also concluded negotiations on ASEAN-China FTA. We hope to do the same with Japan by upgrading the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership to tap into growth areas such as the green and digital economy. Likewise, we are working with our fellow members within RCEP to explore how to deepen, strengthen, and broaden the scope and coverage of the RCEP agreement. As the largest trade area in the world, covering about 30% of the world's GDP, the RCEP offers businesses access to markets in the region and opportunities to strengthen resilience in their supply chains. In addition to deepening our trade connectivity, there's also potential for Asia to drive deeper digital integration. This is the purpose of the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement, or DEFA. By aligning digital rules and standards and promoting interoperability of digital systems, such as the digital identities and payment systems, we hope that DEFA will enhance cross-border digital trade. This could potentially double the size of the digital economy within Southeast Asia to $2 trillion by 2030. Cross-border payment system and connectivity is one of the key enablers of this digital economy. Together with some of our ASEAN neighbors, such as Malaysia, Thailand, as well as Philippines, Singapore is now working with India to develop a multilateral real-time payment network under Project Nexus to link multiple domestic fast payment systems at scale. I hope that more countries in Asia will join us on this project so that we can grow it into a global public payment utility connecting ASEAN to the world and the world to ASEAN. Beyond goods and services, the cross-border flow of electrons is another growth opportunity that Asia can explore together. We are making plans to develop an integrated ASEAN power grid, or APG, one of the key enablers of our region's low-carbon transition. The APG will facilitate the flow of renewable energy across borders and reduce reliance on coal and other fossil fuels. This will also open up opportunities for green economy. In this regard, we welcome the interest and support of the World Bank and Asian Development Bank in mobilizing financing to support the APG project. ASEAN countries have committed to decisively accelerate the realization of the APG by 2045. Japan has been a long-standing supporter of ASEAN's clean energy transition efforts, and I look forward to its continued support, including for the APG, through initiatives such as the ASEAN-Japan Energy Efficiency Partnership, Cleaner Energy Future Initiative for ASEAN, and the Asia Zero Emissions Community. Third, we must press ahead with reforms of our global institutions such as the WTO. The WTO is not perfect, but remains an important foundation on which we can build a better global rules-based trade architecture. About 3/4 of global trade today continue to be conducted under the WTO's MFN rules. The WTO's framework on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, and trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights continue to be valuable to all members, including the United States. Therefore, while the system is not perfect, we must not abandon it. Instead, we should reform it and make it better. It is in Asia's interest to step forward and work with other like-minded partners to modernize WTO. I mentioned earlier about the GSI on e-commerce. We need to enable such plurilateral agreements to move forward within the WTO framework. Such flexible modalities allow WTO rules to keep up with the dynamic global trading environment and stay relevant. We also need to reform the existing consensus-based decision-making process so that it is deployed responsibly and does not end up a recipe for gridlock. We must also update the WTO rulebook to address issues such as state subsidies in industrial policies, as well as to respond to the emerging challenges of the digital revolution and the fight against climate change. This way, we can ensure that WTO remains effective and relevant and serve as the bedrock of the global rules-based multilateral trading order. Between Singapore and Japan, we can leverage our like-mindedness, our convergence of strategic outlook, and our many existing and new platforms for cooperation to advance our common agenda of strengthening and reforming the multilateral institutions. Next year, Singapore and Japan will commemorate our 60th year of diplomatic links. We should take this opportunity to explore new areas of collaboration, such as digital trade, supply chain resilience, as well as the green technology. Beyond economics, we also welcome Japan to play a bigger role in regional peace and stability in Southeast Asia. Singapore stands ready to work with Japan as a trusted and reliable partner, and we hope to step up our economic and security cooperation in time to come. Ladies and gentlemen, against the challenges of maintaining strategic autonomy, preserving the rules-based multilateral trading order, and protecting the global commons, Asia must come together to forge new alliances, deepen regional integration, and build a stronger WTO. Let us work together to create a future that is open, inclusive, and prosperous for all of us. Thank you very much.
So we will now move to Q&A session. I would like to ask a couple of questions to the Vice Prime Minister before taking questions from the audience.
DPM Gang for delivering valuable insights. Now we are moving on to the Q&A session. Firstly, I would like to hear your thoughts on the role of multinational trade frameworks such as CPTPP and RCEP. Amidst global trade turmoil, what role should such multinational frameworks play? Is there a need to increase the number of member countries or improve their structure and functions? And also, Singapore has been supporting China's application for membership to the CPTPP, but do you think that the existing criteria for accession should be maintained?
Thank you very much. There are many questions in this one question. Let me try to answer them one by one. First, multilateral and plurilateral partnerships like CPTPP and RCEP are very important, particularly in today's world, because this environment, particularly with Liberation Day and with tariffs imposed by US, I think the global rules-based trading order is being undermined and being weakened, and it is therefore important for countries with like-mindedness to find ways to come together, to strengthen our cooperation, to strengthen our links, so that we can continue to move ahead. And it's also important for this multilateral organization, like CPTPP and RCEP and ASEAN, to demonstrate to the rest of the world that despite this contestation and competition, there is still room for cooperation and collaboration. And that is why, even within ASEAN itself, we had a meeting among the ASEAN economic ministers a couple of weeks ago that we emphasized our common shared objective of further integrating ASEAN, deepening our economic cooperation, and also to expand our collaboration with other organizations. And that is why ASEAN has also started to make engagement with organizations like CPTPP and EU, as well as the GCC, as I mentioned earlier in my speech, to see how we can come together, to work together, to explore opportunities to cooperate with one another. And organizations like CPTPP and RCEP should also continue to see how they can deepen their cooperation within these organizations, at the same time expand the scope of cooperation among members, as well as extend the cooperation and engagement with other parties. CPTPP, for example, is also working towards having a dialogue with organizations like EU and ASEAN, so that we can talk about how we can work together and continue to push this rules-based trading system. And it is beyond just tariffs and trade, because among these different groupings, there are also opportunities for cooperation in many areas. One example is the digital economy. It is also important for countries and regions to come together to work out how can we ensure that our digital systems are more aligned with one another, more interoperable. This way, this will allow the economies to be more integrated among ourselves, at the same time to also facilitate digital trade. So I think there are many areas that we can work together. And one particular area that I mentioned also in my speech, and that is some of the global challenges really require cooperation of everybody to tackle. One example is a global pandemic. I think we have just come out of COVID-19, and we can see that from our experience in COVID-19 that we need every country to work together to manage this pandemic. And similarly, if we are faced with another financial crisis, I think it's important for us to find a way to work with one another to address the challenges of financial crisis. And of course, all of us now are concerned about climate change, and the solution to climate change requires global cooperation too. And therefore, I think it will continue to be important for CPTPP and RCEP to work together, deepen their cooperation within themselves, expand their cooperation with other partners, as well as extend into other areas of cooperation beyond just trade and investment. And with regard to China's interest in joining CPTPP, as we mentioned, Singapore's position is very clear. We have always encouraged and want to support countries which are ready to join and are able to meet the standards of CPTPP. And beyond China, Indonesia has also indicated interest and has applied to join CPTPP. And as a fellow ASEAN member, we are also very supportive of Indonesia's ascension to CPTPP. So I think we really want to encourage more and more countries to come on board, to work together, to find ways to cooperate with one another. Some may be bilateral, some may be plurilateral, some may be regional. So this way we can have many platforms of cooperation. Between Singapore and Japan, too, we have a lot of areas that we work together. And we certainly look forward to working with Japan next year as we celebrate and commemorate our 60th anniversary of a diplomatic relationship. I think this is an important milestone for us to explore new opportunities to work together. Sorry, I talk a lot. As a politician, whenever I have an opportunity to speak, it's very hard to stop.
Thank you. You're leading a task force to address the impact of tariffs on your country. The US, with which your country has an FTA, is demanding a 10% tariff. While the tariff rate is lower compared to other ASEAN countries, the impact is certainly expected. Singapore has already lowered its economic growth forecast for 2025. What specific impacts do you anticipate on the domestic economy? Will this lead to worsening business conditions for SMEs or employment environment? How will you address this?
Thank you very much. I think the impact of the Liberation Day on Singapore have many levels of impact. First, domestically, immediate impact of the 10% baseline tariff imposed on Singapore. It's imposed on most countries. So I think the playing field remains level, but it will add cost to the exports of Singapore to the US. And that's the first level. So some of our businesses are recalculating, reevaluating, and reassessing the cost of exports to US, and definitely it will impact Singapore in terms of the cost of our exports. That's the first level. The second level is that with this uncertainty about tariffs, and we do not know what the additional tariffs are going to be in time to come, and therefore many businesses are taking a wait-and-see attitude, not just in Singapore, but many other countries. And this wait-and-see attitude will cause businesses to hold back their investment decision, their spending, their hiring, and as a result of that, you will see overall economic activity will slow down. And this is not just Singapore, this is global. And Singapore, being a small and open economy, it depends on the global economy to develop and to grow. And as global economies slow down, Singapore economy will also slow down as a result of this wait-and-see attitude among all the businesses. And that is why we have adjusted our economic growth forecast downwards. But the third level, which is more concerning, is that this uncertainty in raising tariffs and reducing tariffs and imposing additional export controls and import regulation creates a lot of uncertainty. And at the same time, it also undermines the rules-based system. As I mentioned in my speech, I think one of the key tenets of WTO is this MFN, Most Favored Nation rule, which means that the same, if you give a tariff concession to one country, the same concession must apply to all countries in WTO. But with this bilateral negotiation between US and individual members of WTO, it creates uncertainty that the MFN rule under WTO may be undermined. If that happens, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for countries to work with one another to predict how trade is going to be conducted in time to come. And therefore, even after Liberation Day is over, I think even at the end of 90 days, whatever outcome that may be, the uncertainty remains that tariffs can be raised or reduced at any point in time. And this will result in a weakening of the global trading system. And that is going to be the new order of the day in time to come. This will be the new landscape. And that is why this is very concerning to small countries and open economies like Singapore that depends on global trade for our economy. Our trade is 3 times our GDP. That's how important trade is for Singapore. And trade is also very important for many countries, including Japan. And that is something that is worrying for us, and that is in the longer term, even after the tariffs have settled in one way or the other, the new environment will be very different because the rules-based system will be undermined. And that is why Singapore has decided to set up a task force. And this task force has 3 key missions. The first is to gather information because the things are changing all the time. Every morning when you open a newspaper, there's always great news on trade and tariffs, and sometimes it's shocking news, and that's a first dish on your breakfast table. So I think it's something that we are always concerned about, and therefore it's important for us in Singapore to better understand this information, share it with the businesses, and try to make sense of this information together with the businesses. And that's why this task force first mission is to gather information and make sense of the information. The second mission of this task force is to look at immediate challenges, identify the issues that are faced by our companies in the short term in response to changes in tariffs in different countries. So this way, we will help to prepare them to deal with the immediate impact of the tariff changes. And we also work with them to see what additional support the government will need to put in place to help them weather and navigate through these very choppy waters. Okay. But the third mission that this task force has to do is to take a longer-term view. As I mentioned earlier, that I think after the Liberation Day, I think it will be a new landscape that we'll be facing. And how do we prepare our companies and our businesses and our economy as a whole to deal with this new landscape is something that we will need to plan for. This may happen in 5 years, 10 years' time, but we have to start planning today and help companies to transform and to navigate through these longer-term challenges. And it's not just the companies, we also need to prepare our workers, our workforce, so that they have the necessary skills for the economies of the future. And that's why we have introduced a scheme called Skills Future Credit to help companies and workers to train for the future. This is something that this task force will be looking at. So 3 issues. 1, information sharing and make sense. Secondly, immediate short-term impact and solutions. And thirdly, plan for the long term. So these are the 3 key missions of this task force. And we work together with not just within the government, but also with businesses, private sector, with trade unions looking after the workers. And therefore, the task force is a tripartite task force: government, private sector, and the workforce representative through the unions. So I think this is a whole of a Singapore approach to tackling this crisis.
Okay, my last question is about collaboration with Japan. Could you elaborate what role do you expect the Japanese government and Japanese companies to play in Asia?
Thank you very much. I think Japan can play a very important role in Asia's growth and development. Economically, I think Japan has technology, Japan has strong economy, and has very strong enterprises. And in fact, Japan played a very significant role in Singapore's development and growth, particularly in the early days. When Singapore started industrialization in the early 70s, after we gained our independence, where we want to grow our economy, grow our investment, grow our jobs for our people. And Japanese companies had confidence in Singapore in these early days and invested significantly in Singapore, growing many of our industries and training Singaporean workers. So I think this is something that Japan has contributed to the development and growth of Singapore's economy. And the continuing forward, we continue to see opportunities for Japanese businesses to invest in Singapore, because Singapore is still a growing hub for Asia, and it's a gateway for the rest of Southeast Asia. And we continue to encourage Japan to invest in Singapore's economy. But beyond just economics, we are also working very closely with Japan on climate change and looking at alternative solutions to energy needs, whether it's hydrogen, ammonia, and other carbon solutions such as carbon capture and storage. These are technologies that Japan is developing, and we are very keen to cooperate with Japan in this area. And we are also looking at developing new initiatives, particularly in connection with celebration of 60th anniversary next year. We are discussing how we can come together and explore cooperation in tourism, cooperation in trade, investment, cooperation in green economy, as well as digital economy. But beyond economics and investment and trade, there's also a role for Japan to play in ensuring and contributing to the stability and security of the Southeast Asian region. I think we also have a lot of defense cooperation between Singapore and Japan and the region with Japan. So we will encourage Japan to take to lean forward in helping to ensure and support the security and stability in the Southeast Asian region, as well as growing the Southeast Asian economy. So there are a lot of opportunities that we can work together between Singapore and Japan, ASEAN and Japan. And Singapore and Japan are partners in many areas. We are partners in CPTPP. We are partners in RCEP. We are also partners in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity during the Biden administration. So I think we have many areas that we work together. One particular area that we work very well with Japan was in the JSI on e-commerce I mentioned earlier. there were 3 co-conveners of this GSI: Singapore, Japan, and Australia. So we have worked very closely with Japan in pushing ahead on this GSI on e-commerce. And we look forward to continue working with Japan, particularly in pushing ahead with this support for rules-based multilateral trading system.
それではすみません、会場から質問をお受けしたいと思います。大変恐縮ですが、ちょっとお時間の都合で
Now we would like to take questions from the audience, but because of the time constraint, we would like to take only one question.
はい、ではこちらの方お願い。
So please, the person sitting on the side.
Thank you very much for your expectation for Japanese economy and business. But on the other hand, in my understanding, Japanese economy is after, especially 2000, quite struggling and very stable. But on the other hand, Singapore economy and business is quickly increasing. For example, as of 2000, GDP per capita, Singapore and Japan are almost same at the time, around US dollar 30,000. 30,000 US dollar, but nowadays Singapore's GDP per capita is double or triple than Japan. So we would like to ask you some advice or suggestion for Japanese business and economy and politics from your point of view.
Thank you very much. I think, thank you for your compliment about Singapore's economy, but at the end of the day, if you look at Singapore's economy, our per capita income, GDP may be high, but our overall, Singapore is still a very small economy. And look at Japan, the total size of the economy is very significant. And therefore, do not underestimate the potential of Japanese economy to grow. And Japanese economy has always been very innovative, and it's something that Singapore always wanted to learn from Japan, how to continue to have an innovative economy. And these are areas that we can work together. And Japan has also a lot of startups. I think this is something that we want to find a way to work together, because we want to encourage Japanese startups to come to Singapore, to set up operations in Singapore, and because the whole of Asia is your market, and Singapore is the best gateway to the rest of Asia because of our extensive connectivity. So we can work together. And we also encourage Singapore startups to come to Japan, to work with startups in Japan to tap into the technology that Japan may be able to offer and see how we can work together. So I think there are many opportunities for Japan and Singapore to work together. So do not underestimate the capability of the Japanese economy, the innovativeness of your people, and the productivity of your workers. And there are many, many things that we actually look up to Japan and want to learn from Japan. And one area that we have been trying to encourage our companies to do is to also go out of Singapore to develop an external wing of investments outside Singapore, because Singapore's economy itself is very small, and we do want our companies to be global in nature, or at least start with regional and eventually become global companies. And Japanese companies, many of them are already global companies. So I think this is something that we also are very keen to see how can we help our companies regionalize and globalize. And these are things that we can learn from Japan too. And for me, many years ago, I was also sent to Japan to learn about Japanese technology. At that time, I was in a steel making company in Singapore, and I came to Japan to be attached to a steel mill to understand how Japan managed steel production, which is very different from what we do in Singapore. And when I went back, we revamped our production system, our management system, and learning from Japan how to be disciplined, how to ensure high productivity in our shop floor. So all these are the things that I think Japan can contribute, not only to Singapore, but to the rest of the world too.
はい、すみません。まだ
Well, there are many more things that I would like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister, but unfortunately time is up. So thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister, for your presence here today.